Hi everyone and welcome to my updated Hydra Sorc guide for Season 9. So lately I've been playing Sorc a little bit and it's an absolute blast. I guess that comes as no surprise at this point. People have been playing Sorc up and down this entire season, but I also want to give you just my version of it. So I've been blasting with this and just gain some paragons very easily, and you see it's flying through those pits. It's actually incredibly fast and a ton of fun. So you can do something like 60 to 70 seconds consistently farming pit 75 to 80 with like a well-geared character. So my character is relatively optimized here. As you can see, I'm doing like one cast teleports, for example, which is kind of like a big milestone to hit with your cooldowns. And you just get to the point where your Hydras just one-tap everything in those tiers. So with a little bit of like muscle memory and like figuring out how much time you need to defeat certain packs, for example, you get to the point where you can put down a Hydra, teleport away to the next pack, and while doing that, the Hydra will basically leave nothing behind you and everything just melts instantly. So I made an updated planner for you guys to enjoy. If you're still playing Season 9 and you want to make this possible, then you can go check this out and I'll walk you through it. But yeah, this is like probably the fastest build you can play right now in Season 9. There are other contenders that are pretty close to this. You don't have to play just Hydra Sorc as your only build if you want to, for example, farm Paragons effectively, but it is really good. And probably the best once it's fully optimized. So other builds that are also really fast include, for example, Evade Spiritborn, which is relatively close to this, maybe Chain Lightning Sorc, and there's also stuff like, for example, Death Trap Rogue still, and these kind of things that are also like flying through the pits, but probably a little bit slower. So we're probably looking more at like 75 to 90 seconds range and not 60 seconds. But it is definitely possible to do like 1 minute or faster. I think my fastest run was something like 45 seconds or something on like a, around pit 80 or so. After grinding for a while, sometimes you get these incredible runs, and this is kind of what you can expect. Obviously, you blast through everything and lower than that anyway, like Torment 4 content, T4 lair bosses, they all melt instantly, and those Hydras take no prisoners. So you can definitely play this build, maybe not at the same speed right from the start. It is actually something we have a leveling guide for on Maxroll as well. So there's a Hydra Sorc leveling guide, but it really gets supercharged once you have the Serpentine aspect, which is like kind of like the key aspect here. It's very powerful for this build. You want to try to hit that as soon as possible. And then obviously add a lot of mana regeneration so they can fuel this aspect, because every time you cast a Hydra, it will consume all of your mana. So you need to have a lot of mana regeneration, which is quite easily possible though with the Primordial Bindings passive and, for example, the Reactive Ooze Season Power this time around. So like this, your mana fills up in like a second or two anyway, and you can spam Hydras easily everywhere all the time. And then you have the Ophidian Iris, the new unique neck that Hydra Sorcs got in Season 9, which allows you to make these Giga Hydras by adding more Hydra heads, for example, from the temper on your weapon, and that makes them more powerful. So let's jump into the setup here. This is my planner. We have a few different variants. So there's the Ancestral, so no Mythics. Then we have the standard Mythic variant. This is an Inferno-based build. Inferno is a very powerful ultimate here that gives you a vulnerable for free, and then a lot of extra damage for your fire skills. And then we have the Giga Speed version. So this is the one that you just saw here in those clips, which is just for like those 1 minute pit runs. And here the idea is that we use lightning skills, we have Unstable Currents for extra attack speed, and we use Ball Lightning to trigger Unstable Currents to get free, for example, Lightning Spears, giving us these Primordial Binding stacks. So this is pretty important to max out here, lots of damage, movement speed, mana, and so on. This is incredible once you have 10 stacks. And with like those extra ranks you can get, for example, from the neck, this scales to ridiculous amounts. So this is kind of the reason here with Ball Lightning, and because we also want to reset our teleport. So you don't really want to spam your Hydra all the time to reset your teleports because of this consumption mechanic from the Serpentine aspect. So you usually want to like hold down Ball Lightning and then cast a Hydra like every 2-3 seconds or so into a pack, and then hold down Ball Lightning, and every time you cast a Ball Lightning, you can do another evade teleport with the teleport enchant, at least once you have enough evade cooldown reduction. So you can get this pretty low. You see here my teleport says 1.2 seconds, which is actually too much cooldown. You can get away with something like a 1.6 or 1.7 even. So you don't need to have perfect cooldown everywhere. but you want to get kind of close so that you actually reach this kind of breakpoint here where one cast with the boots and with the right implicit is enough to reset your teleports, and then you can really fly. Before that, you most likely have to go for 2 casts. So when you don't have, for example, like a really good Shaco or like a really good, like, Masterwork, Evade Temper here, then you will probably have to do 2 casts instead, or use something like Flicker Step, which is also an alternative. Other than that, these setups are fairly similar. So we have all the same aspects, you have all the same like uniques and so on. There's a lot of very generic stuff like Tarasha, it has cooldown, has lots of damage. You just need to make sure that you use 3 different types of skills, which we kind of generally do by default. So we have Frost skill, Ice Armor, we have a Pyromancy skill, the Hydra, and then we have Shock, usually the Teleport. So you kind of get Tarasha by default. If you have a star list, that's kind of nice, but you don't really have to go for it. We have other alternatives that are pretty good. For example, just this normal ring. There's also Inferno cooldown you can put on this to make this easier to cast all the time. But for example, with the speed setup here, we have Unstable Currents. So it's very easy to keep this up because it has 10 seconds duration, where Inferno has only like a 3 or 4 seconds duration. So you have to cast Inferno a lot more often than Unstable Currents, for example. So this also requires a bit more like investment into cooldown to make this possible. The one mythic unique that I really want to go for is Harlequin Crest, ideally with GA cooldown, but in fact I was not running with a GA cooldown. I just had a triple Masterworked normal cooldown for 44%, and that was actually enough to get this 1-to-1 cycle going with the Teleport Enchant. So it is possible to do this, but you will need a pretty good Evade Temper. And you have to Masterwork this up, and you will already need extra cooldown here on the offhand, and you also want to have a relatively good roll on the Tarasha. And then you get to this 1-1 cycle. But if you get the GA cooldown Shaco, then this is much more relaxed. In fact, it's so relaxed that you can get to the point where you can run a staff, which is more damage. Because Serpentine Aspect is so large, you want to kind of double up on it with a 2-handed weapon, and then you just give up one of the other aspects, either Flashfire or Stormswell. They are relatively close anyway in power, but then you can run the staff and you have a lot more damage. But this is really only once you have like GG gear, basically with a triple Masterwork like Shaco like this, and then something like this here, you can actually reach the point where it's enough. But it's kind of tough to do this, and I was also not running with the stuff myself. Besides the Harlequin Crest, the other 2 mythics are not really so impactful. So Shroud is nice because it's lots of extra damage and just like lots of little effects here. It also gives you lots of defense because there's a really strong defensive passes on the sword. There's protection, there's the mana shield, there's stuff like dampen layer and energy focus and so on. But realistically, you can easily get away with a Raiment. There's also like a lot of damage and, kind of comparable offensive output, at least not as defensive, but the teleport also like pulls everything together, which is relatively useful for the Hydra since they don't have crazy large AoE. So you can run with that until you get the Shroud at least. And also the Starless is not that crazy. You can definitely get away with a normal ring here as well. And you don't really need this, and it's kind of nice to have, but it's fine without. Besides that, there are also reasons to use other helms. You can run a Perdition, but obviously you will not be able to have this insane cooldown recovery, and your teleports will be much slower. So you have to do like a 2-cast cycle or something like that if you don't have the Harlequin Crest. But it is a lot of damage. And for example, when you go higher tiers or maybe like just progressing and you just randomly find a Perdition, you can definitely run that. There's also the Hail of Verglass. So this is something that is used for like the highest tier pushing, where people go with this and you use ice shards on your bar. And then you press ice shards at least once every 5 seconds so that you keep up this buff and you have a 100% damage buff. It also has pretty good stats. There's lots of attack speed, a bunch of cooldown, int. So it's a lot of damage, even more damage than Perdition, but not that much more, to be honest. So if you feel like this Hail of Verglass stuff is a bit too complicated, then you can definitely get away with a Perdition, and you don't have to worry about pressing these ice shards all the time. But this is what people use for the highest possible tiers, at least. I didn't really put this into my planner here, so I don't have like a push version, because I think if you play like the mythic variant, then you're gonna be just fine, and it's a lot more chill. It's very tanky, it feels good and easy with the cooldowns, with the Shaco, but you can squeeze out a few more tiers if you go with the Hail of Verglass variant. So if you really want to push like 110 plus or something like that, you will have to do this. But even this build here can quite comfortably reach like 100 plus pits, easily level Eclipse to 100. so it should be no problem at all. One thing that people ask me about all the time is the axial conduit. So why is this item included? And this is mostly for the resources, in particular the resource maximum. This is because of the serpentine aspect. So the more mana you have, the more damage your Hydra does. And this is just the best in slot pants offensively. And it also has a pretty good defensive upside here with the damage reduction. So if you, for example, also get a GA on the damage reduction, you're gonna get pretty tanky, especially if you include the Shroud and the Harlequin. You are gonna be a tank. And I have like 12k life in this setup here. You can definitely get away with much less, and you don't need to have even that much. You can get away with like 5k or something like that on softcore easily. Potentially even a hardcore, to be honest. But I generally like to make my setups fairly tanky. I also have, for example, a flame shield in here, which is pretty optional, to be honest. I never really press it, even on hardcore. It's kind of like whatever. And I see, for example, some people that run ice blades here, and you get like a bit of extra attack speed, for example. So I have this in the standard variant and not in the speed variant here, because I found it kind of annoying to play with it. But you can easily replace Flame Shield and then pick up Ice Blades again, have this 30% attack speed, so it can go a little bit faster if you try to weave it in between your other casts. But for example, for this variant, it's just kind of for chill farming, and I really enjoy just kind of like holding down Ball Lightning, pressing space all the time for the teleport, and then here and there I cast a Hydra, and this is really all I do. So obviously you can tweak these setups a little bit to your liking. If you want to do it with a bit more complicated and a bit more faster setup, then you can definitely include the Ice Blades again here, for example. Another question I keep getting all the time is the Familiar enchant and the Teleport enchant. So how does this work? Well, the Familiar counts as all elements, and we have the enchantment master board, so this is here. So basically we have 2 lightning enchants, and this gives us plus 60% damage for lightning, and then we can make our fire damage equal to that thanks to the season power. So we have the Smoldering Ember that sets our fire damage to the highest element that we have. So all this lightning damage gets converted over to fire, and with this combo of Familiar enchant and Teleport enchant, we then get more damage for our Hydra with this 60% bonus from the Enchanted Master. Other than that, obviously triggering Familiars is kind of nice because it means more minions. So this again for Primordial Binding stacks. If you want to squeeze out a little bit more damage, then you can also actually invest those 3 points here to get the 10% extra from Invoked Familiar. So you will spawn a Familiar of the same damage type when you cast Hydra, 33% of the time. So you can actually squeeze out a bit more damage here if you want to. Again, as I mentioned, it's a fairly tanky setup that I have here. You can easily put this in there and you're gonna just like melt stuff even easier. But I like to have stuff like Mana Shield or Protection, and it just feels good to have like insane barriers all the time. You don't have to worry about anything, and this 10% damage just doesn't really do much because you're just melting for everything anyway. But at least for like, for example, pushing higher tiers, this might be something to pick up, and then you have a bit more output. Some notes about cooldown reduction for not just the teleport, but for your other skills. I do have the Neo and Zac rune combo here. So this means that as long as you don't take health damage, which is, you know, basically never, because we have a lot of barriers, you get 2 seconds of your ultimates every 2 seconds, basically. So effectively you have double the cooldown recovery for your ultimate. So for the Inferno setup, you want to cast Inferno roughly every 4 seconds, and with a perfect cooldown reduction value and skill ranks, you get to 8.1 seconds. Divided by 2, it's roughly 4 seconds. So you will be able to cast Inferno every 4 seconds using this combo and having good enough cooldown reduction. Or maybe early on, for example, before you have a Shaco, then you have a bit of cooldown here on the helm, you have a cooldown here, you have the Inferno temper, and you can get at least relatively close to, for example, like a 5 or maybe 6 second timer, and you can still keep up this buff relatively well. When you do Unstable Currents, we don't really need that much cooldown to make it work because it lasts 10 seconds. So you don't need the Neo and Zac, and I have Neo and Fool instead. The Frost Nova is like a nice vulnerable spread. It also just, you know, makes everything safer, and it also adds a 15% damage taken debuff to enemies, so that's kind of neat. And we can easily reset our Unstable Currents with the Orange Herald aspect here. So you just need like 1 or 2, maybe 3 procs of this every 10 seconds. So your Hydras have a bit of a lucky hit chance, your other skills also have a bit of lucky hit. So this just kind of like triggers and resets your Unstable Currents. And again, here this also helps sometimes with Inferno, for example, early on. But you might even get to the point where these procs don't really matter anyway. For our season powers, so we have the attack speed here from Catalytic Skill. So attack speed is somewhat helpful, but I'm not 100% sure how much. All I know is that attack speed just doesn't really help Hydras as much as it helps other skills, so they have some scaling of it and they do attack a little bit more often, but it's not really the same kind of linear like value that you would expect with like typical attack skills. So it's not a super high priority, but it's kind of nice to have. Then we have the extra 50% summon damage from Reverie Horn. So this is a pretty big jewel here. I definitely want to have that so that your Hydras do more damage, and this triggers like all the time, especially in speedruns. And then we have Scornful Light for the extra 20% elemental damage. But you can also play around with this and maybe use other setups. So for example, you can do Idol from below, especially for pushing. This might be something because you get these Jewel Guardians and they give you like free progression, for example. You also have a bit more life, a bit more damage and unhindered, which is kind of neat. You can also go for like a more defensive variant, for example, with the Heraldic Crest if you really want to. But I don't think you really care about it too much. And here in your Heraldic spellcraft, the one thing that really matters is Reactive Ooze. This just gives you like all the resource gen, and together with the mana regeneration bonus on Primordial Binding, you can fill up your entire mana pool in like 2 seconds or something like that, maybe faster even, because it just gives you so much regeneration, and then you can cast your Hydras at full mana frequently enough. One note about the Paragon board, so I have one Inferno board and one Lightning board, so obviously this depends on which ultimate you're using. There is basically one board that's different. We have Frigid Fate here, which gives you bonus damage against vulnerable enemies. So we make stuff vulnerable with Inferno here, and with the speed setup we go for the Ceaseless Conduit instead. So we have Crackling Energy, there's a bunch of synergies you can pick up here, and we have a more immediate damage bonus. So you don't have to first make enemies vulnerable and then we do extra damage to them, but sometimes we just don't have vulnerable up, and instead we have a permanent 60% damage buff from the Crackles. So for example, the Ball Lightning here can spawn Crackling Energy. And we can also pick up stuff like Convulsions here for extra damage from Crackling Energy. And like this, you have just like more immediate output as you fly through those maps, because you don't have time to really like make anything vulnerable anyway. But it does still happen, for example, from the Lightning Spears. So he's gonna trigger random Lightning Spears while casting Ball Lightning thanks to Unstable Currents. And that's still... it gives you vulnerable pretty much on all targets, but maybe not instantly. And that's pretty much it here for this Hydra setup. I had a ton of fun playing Hydra Sorc, and I can only just recommend it. I have a few more notes here if you want to check that out. And of course we have a Maxroll guide as well that is relatively similar, so you can go check out this in more detail if you want to read up on you know, more mechanics and more of the gameplay and so on. So here's Northwar's guide, and that has most of the similar stuff as well included. So go check this out. I'll link this down in the description, including my planner. Otherwise, I wish you good luck with the remaining Season 9. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.